Let's talk about trees. Okay. So I think the first thing, let's get used to using this chat box. So I want to know, um, does anybody have a favorite tree? Type it in. Or maybe you have like a really great climbing tree. Ooh, favorite tree, birch, pawpaw. I like it. Oaks. We're going to talk about birch trees and oak trees today. No pawpaws, but that'll be really great for those of you guys who are curious about hickories, actually. So hickory leaves and pawpaw leaves look very similar. Ooh, magnolias. Okay, southern magnolia is my baby. That's my favorite climbing tree. Maples, nice. Black birch and tulip. We're going to talk about both of those. Tulip poplar. Yep, definitely going to talk about that guy today. Eucalyptus. We are not talking about eucalyptus today. How cool. Very cool. So let's see, what about, does anybody have a favorite edible item from a tree, or maybe something that you've ever picked from a tree? So type that into the chat box, anything you've picked from a tree. I have definitely picked grapes growing on vines up high in trees. So that's kind of a fun one. Oh, maple syrup, pawpaws. Okay, figs. I love figs. Pecans. Oh yes, that's a type of hickory, actually, the pecan. Cherries, figs, elderberries, not from a tree, definitely from a shrub. But service berries count. Apples, great one. Dates, that's exotic. Wait, is that from our person who is from the eucalyptus? Because I have never seen dates growing around here. I hear you can do it, but I don't know too much about it. Well, cool. So just to give you guys a little bit of an idea, you know, these classes that we've been running, we've had a whole big series on just mushrooming basics in general. And I mean, there's reasons that there's these huge books about, learning about mushrooms, because there's really a lot of information. We grow up feeling really comfortable with plants. We go to the grocery store and we touch the fruits and the veggies and we start learning about stuff. And but mushrooms are a little different. In our grocery stores, we get like large portobellos and the white button mushrooms, and we're just now starting to see oyster mushrooms, and maybe every now and then you're seeing shiitake mushrooms, or if you're really lucky you see some chanterelles in like the fancy store, but we just don't really have a lot of exposure. And actually, it wasn't until just a couple of decades ago that the scientific community even recognized mushrooms as being a totally different kingdom from the plant kingdom. So if you missed any of those series that was talking about, the differences between these two kingdoms, what makes a mushroom, I definitely contact Foxhaven because they do have access to those recordings, which really help to build up to a lot of the work that we're going to see today. So in addition, let's talk about what our expectations are for today. So any of you guys have any of you guys been, well, if you've been in the series, go ahead and type in the chat box how much you should be expecting to retain from today. Does anybody remember the percentage? I'm really big on this because when you have a nice 10%, very good. Yes, we got some people who are quick on the draw here. So having the right expectation for what you should be retaining from a class really helps to load the pressure off. Okay, today we're going to talk, you're going to see photos and pictures from a dozen different trees. That's a lot of trees. That's way too much for you guys to feel like you have to have perfect by the end of today. Okay, so 100%, no, you're not going to remember 100% of what we do today. Okay, but just aim for about 10%. And I'm actually going to point out to you the 10% that is the most important. And then everything else is just peripherals. Okay, so basically this class is designed to be a superficial outline that gives you a place to start on your journey to understanding trees. Okay, think of it like understanding the rules of the road. Okay, right? Like before you get your driver's license, you've got to learn how to read the road signs. You need to know, east versus west, major differences in the speed between the interstate, highways, and regular roads. You learn how to watch out for reckless drivers and what different lines on the road mean. But you can't learn everything in those classes. It takes time to really absorb everything. In time on your own, you start learning how to get from one place to the next. You learn a huge variety of road signs as you see them. They can't all be in the books. And you learn how to change your speed from different road terrain. Maybe your car can drive a little faster on one, but it has to go slower on another. There's just a lot of different things you learn, like the specifics of a traffic light, right? Like that's not in a book. You learn that in time. And mushroom hunting is exactly the same. There's a lot to learn. And today, just to be clear, we are not going to be discussing a lot of mushrooms. I'm going to give you some lists of mushrooms and a couple of things about maybe their seasonality. But today's class is not about ID. It's not about toxicity. It's not really about what mushrooms are. This is really more about the trees that are really closely associated with mushrooms. Because the saying goes, if you want to hunt mushrooms, hunt trees. Okay. Any good mushroomer will tell you that. Now, a casual hobbyist will just say, oh, well, I look around for some morels and I find them here. But somebody who's really hunting them, who wants to be able to go from their local county park, maybe to the state park, or maybe visit their friend in a totally different state and actually go mushroom hunting, you need to know your trees. Otherwise, you're just going to be really frustrated and it's not any fun. Okay. I is pretty smart. Somebody has a photographic memory. Lucky you. Okay. Morels, tulip poplars. Yes. Okay. We'll go over a lot more of this as we go. I am reading through the chat. I have, if you see me looking over to the side, it's because I have my chat opened over here. Okay. All right, so before we get into any of the ID stuff and before I get into the presentation, I do want to make sure you guys have your printouts. We will be using those as we go along. That's actually going to help us because you're already going to have some tree shapes, which I do not have in the presentation. And then I also have leaf shapes. So I'm actually going to put that into the chat right now in case you didn't print it out earlier. Okay, and I have, there we go. Okay, so the first one is if you have an Apple computer or a Mac computer. So that's the first one that's going in. It'll take just a second to load up. But I do highly recommend, even if you don't have it printed, do pull it up alongside this presentation because it will really, really help you. It's just so much easier to have a different set of comparison items. And there are certain items that are on the printouts that are actually not in the presentation and vice versa. So it's designed so that you can actually be writing notes as you go along. There are spaces for that. And it is numbered. I will be going along with those numbers. So that should have, oh, I did the Mac one twice. Don't mind me. My brain is a little bit mushy. Okay. Okay. All right. So that's going through. Now, while we're waiting for that, let's use this chat box just a little bit more, guys. So you guys are already pretty smart. I was already asking, what are some favorite trees? And you guys already have, some feeling of like, yes, I understand a few trees. I love a tree. I grew up with a tree. Maybe I climbed magnolia trees when I was younger. I grew up in the South, so lots of Southern magnolias. But I want you guys to type into our chat box. Think of, we're just coming out of winter, okay? We've just stopped having nights that are below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's just starting to get warm. What are things that we would see in early springtime that would help us to identify a tree? What are components? Go ahead and type it into the chat. What are things you'd be looking for? Very good. So buds, bark, blossoms will come a little later in the spring. Leaves would also be a little bit later. What else? What else can we be looking at? If I'm in the wintertime, okay, there are no leaves. Very good. Tree shape, sap. Yeah, if you drill in, you could taste it. Height, very good. Very good. So tree shape, that's enormous. Okay, so we can really, really see everything. Yep, debris on the ground, branch patternings, so much easier in early springtime. Absolutely, absolutely. Very good, you guys. So So when we're talking about a lot of this stuff, and actually this is what I was told. So I asked one of my foraging elders. I said, "Hey, I really want to get better at trees. What should I do?" And he said, "Well, here's a book and go look at bark." What? Seriously? It was terrible. Don't do that. Okay. I was so upset and so frustrated for like forever. I was like, I'm so dumb. I don't know how to do this. But that's not true. Um, I know I actually knew a lot of trees, but I wasn't able to associate all of the different parts together. So in the early springtime, that can be a great time to start learning some of the budding patterns that you might see. Okay. And I will show you in the very first part of the presentation a couple of buds. Okay. So you can start seeing what those look like because they come out before the leaves, which is kind of a fun thing. Okay. And then, of course, looking at branch patterns, things like that. We're not going to be going in depth to branch patterning and things like that. Okay. Those are things that you're going to learn in time as you want to learn more specifics of a tree. We're going to be learning a little bit more broad, more leaf shape, some general bark patterns, things like that to really give you a baseline. Because in order to learn a tree, you do need to see it throughout different seasons. So you're going to need some guidebooks in order to get a little bit better at it. Or, okay, get really good at taking notes so that you can find everything online. But I can tell you right now, if you're really trying to find specifics of trees, you really need a guidebook. So my foraging elder told me to get a book, and he said to get the Sibley Guide, okay, which when I opened it up, I was like, how is this a good guidebook? But it is. The language in here is very easy to understand. And when you actually have an idea of, oh, it may be, it's a type of hickory. This is wonderful. But what was really frustrating for me was that inside of here, when it would show you bark patterns, okay, they're drawn. And that was very, very difficult for me to be able to compare those and to understand them from my real life photos or what I was seeing right in front of me. So this is a really good book to have at home for your secondary reference. So we've talked about a couple of books like that too with your mushrooms, where you really want to have a field guide, right, for your first reference when you're out in the field, and then your secondary book for a little bit more in-depth knowledge. So really a great mushroomer is going to have mushroom books and tree books. Now, this is my holy grail of tree books, okay, the National Audubon Society. And I'll tell you, you can get both of these books on thriftbooks.com or other thrift stores for super cheap. Don't buy a new one. They haven't been updated. Trees haven't changed that much, okay? So it can be old, it can be ratty, as long as it's, bound together, okay? What's really great about this is that you can use this Audubon Society book any time of the year. So when it comes to IDing plants, most plant ID books actually go by the flower. So that means you've got to catch it in the season that it's flowering in order to really understand it. Okay. This is different. This is great. So let's say you're going out and you see just leaf shape. So it actually has a reference key and it'll show you, oh, if you think it's that, go to some other color plates further along in here and double check it. Awesome. Let's say you've got a flower. Does the same thing, gives you a reference point, flower, and then you can reference other plates. Then it'll also give you pages where you just have in-depth descriptions a little bit later on. So it's very much like the mushrooming guide. So these are the two guides I highly recommend. Like, you've got your little mushroom kit. You put your Audubon Society mushroom book and the tree book, stick those both in your basket so that as you're taking notes about where you're at, you can actually notate down what trees you're seeing as well. Very, very important to, like I said, really learning this. Now, aside from just leaf shape, the thing that I love the most, because I'm like, I feel in color. So like color is really important to me. You can laugh, it's fine. Okay. They actually have it by color as well. So like in the fall, when you're like, what is this? They have their reds and their yellows and everything and the browns. It's really cool. And then they also, in addition to just leaf, because Audubon Society is great and they understand that everybody learns differently, they have fruit and nuts as well as bark patterns. And these are real photo colors. What I love about it is that you can have them side by side and you can really look at it. Okay, so I can't say enough good things about that. This has been one of the best purchases I've ever made. And if you really can only afford to get one, this is the one that you would get. Okay, same thing for the mushroom book. Okay. All right. So um, a certain percent of people have synesthesia. Yes, I would say I am probably one of those people. I'm so emotional that I feel in colors. Okay. All right. So let's get back to this now. All right. So all right, guys. So we will talk just a little bit about a couple of things in anatomy. But again, one of the benefits of having that Audubon book, to me, one of the things that's really nice about it is that the language in there isn't too overly complicated. A lot of times, if you're looking online for IDs, they're going to go way super like, biology major kind of stuff. It's going to be really difficult. And the Sibley Guide makes it even easier. The other thing about having a Sibley Guide is that it actually has like a whole textbook portion in the beginning that describes to you understanding about leaflets, leaf scarring, bud shape, alternate pinnate, all of those words that are really, really difficult. We're going to talk briefly about some of those things, but that's the sort of stuff where get a guidebook. It's way, way, way better to have that. Okay. All right. So before we get into, like I said, before we get into the presentation, a couple main things. You can go ahead and write this down in your notes. Okay. There are 3 main trees that I want you to feel comfortable with. Okay. Not 100% confident, but comfortable with by the end of class. This is your 10%. Okay. Pine trees, Eastern pine specifically. Okay. Oak trees, not specific. Okay. But I do want you to be able to tell the difference between white and red. Okay. But there's a lot more than white and red. Okay. And the last one is tulip poplars. Okay. So we already had, we've had a couple people mentioning in the chat about tulip poplars for a reason. Okay. All right. So one other thing that I do want to go over before I get into this presentation, a lot of times people will ask or people will see, it says in the books about a mushroom grows on hardwoods. So hardwood versus a softwood tree has nothing to do with actually being tough, the wood, okay? So for example, there are actually softwood trees that are harder, okay, on the hardness scale than hardwood trees. What it actually has to do with is hardwood is the wood that comes from flowering plants, also known as the angiosperms. Okay, so these are, and this talks really more about the seeds, not necessarily the flowers, but when you have a flower, it produces a seed or a nut. Okay, so these types of trees that produce seeds or nuts would be like a walnut, right? So, oh yeah, I eat walnuts, like maples, the little flyaway things. And think oak trees. Okay, oak trees have acorns, so they have little nuts, and these all have a coating on the outside. So that's what makes it a hardwood, is that it has that hard coating on the outside. Okay, so hardwood would not include a tree like a palm tree or bamboo because these don't produce nuts. Okay, softwood comes from the gymnosperm trees, okay, which have needles and they produce cones, right? So think of pine nuts. Okay, so pine nuts are actually within the pine cone. They don't actually have a protective coating on the outside. So that's the difference between hardwood and softwood. Okay, so softwood isn't just evergreen trees, but that's a good way to think about it. Okay, just to give you a little idea there. All right, now, in addition to our 3 main trees, which are all hardwoods, we will be talking about maples, we'll talk about beeches, birch, box elder, and then a couple of our evergreens, hemlocks, spruce. We'll talk about some black locust and a couple of hickory, okay? All right, now, that being said, 2 main groupings when we're thinking about this, if this is just a good general idea. So pine trees, basically you can look for mushrooms under pine trees year round. Okay, easy. Now the 2 other trees that we talked about, we have our oak trees and tulip poplars. Oak trees, that's where you want to be looking in summer and fall. Okay, and your tulip poplars, look there, winter and spring. So those are kind of your 3 main groupings, okay? And this is, keep in mind, this is specifically for the Northeast where we are in like the Pennsylvania DMV area. You start traveling outside of that and your rules start changing, okay? So do want to be clear about that. And when I say hunting for mushrooms, I don't just mean the good edible kind, I mean all the mushrooms. All right, Let's get into this. I've got a big old presentation, lots and lots of photographs. Give me just a moment. There we go. Tulip poplar is winter and spring. All right. Here we go. All righty. So let's talk about leaves versus leaflets. Okay, so if I'm looking in a book and I want to understand leaf shape, I do have to understand this very, very fundamental piece. Once you understand leaf versus leaflet, a lot of stuff gets clear. All the other words make so much more sense and you'll be able to understand it, okay? So on the left-hand side, we see a white oak. That is a leaf. On the right-hand side is a black locust leaf. That is one leaf with 7 to 19 leaflets, okay? So if you actually look, okay, down at the base, you can follow my cursor here. Okay, you can actually see how this widens slightly. However, on each one of these leaflets, if I look at where this little stem, which is called the petiole, is connecting to this other stem here, there's no widening. It's actually just straight. So this is called a petiole, and this long piece is called the stem. And each one of these pieces is called a leaflet. So when you're looking at ID, and this is for anything in the plant kingdom, and it says it has leaflets, okay, that's what you're looking for. So the way that I think about it, and I'm going to show you another page that'll explain this again. I think about if something were to fall off during the fall, okay, and it's going to come off of a branch, the whole leaf would come up. Okay, not each individual leaflet. So where it comes off from the branch, it widens slightly and has a little budding action. So we can see here, this is a couple of basic terminology here. So you can see on the very left-hand side, I've zoomed in just a little bit. You can see a little budding there from the stem, right? The branch is the dark brown, and then there's a little green piece, that's a little bud. And then we actually have, a lot of times that will widen slightly at the base, and then that's the petiole, okay? So how do we tell where the leaf is? Well, you look for the little bud or the widening of the base of that leaf. That's going to tell you which portion of a plant is actually the leaf. So you can see here up at the top, even though the ones in the middle, the palmate and the pinnate, okay, it looks like those are several different leaves. Those aren't. That's what we call our compound leaf. So it's compound. It is many, many different leaflets put together. Okay. And if that doesn't make sense to you, that's okay. We already talked about our 10%. Okay. So that's why you do want to get a guidebook so you can go over this again and again and again. Oh, one other quick thing. Wherever the leaf tears off from the branch, it will leave a leaf scar. And that is actually important to tree ID, especially if you're looking at trees in their early budding stage. All right, so when we talk about bark, there's all different kinds of bark, okay? On the left-hand side, we have extremely smooth bark. It's absolutely beautiful and stunning. That is a beech tree. And that is one of my all-time favorite trees. And then on the right-hand side, we do have a very old black cherry. Now, a younger black cherry tree, you wouldn't see all of this. You see the fissures in here. It kind of looks like it's erupted and it's got little stuff coming out. So they do call those fissures, and they call that becoming scaly, as you can see it kind of changing. Okay, and we see that this really has horizontal bark on here. Now, when it's younger, you don't see as many of these fissures. So when you're looking at a guidebook, most of the time they are describing a middle-aged tree. Okay, so that means for like a cherry tree, it's actually not that old. Cherry trees don't last that long. Okay, black cherry are the oldest ones. They'll last, I forget, like several decades. But a lot of our fruit trees, especially the cultivated ones, they last 10 to 15 years, just to give you a perspective. But our, like for the beech tree, that one there that's on the left, That's probably a good like 60 to 100 years old. Takes a long time for beech trees to grow. Okay. So anyway, just giving you that as an idea. Now, when we are looking at bark, okay, we can talk about fissures and lines. Okay, so on the left-hand side is a red oak, which has very long fissures, okay, versus the white oak, which has a little bit of shorter fissures. Okay, but these are pretty deep. And we can see that in the white oak, those fissures go down and it actually makes them look kind of scaly. So, I mean, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, scaly. So just kind of some good language to learn. Now, as that white oak gets older, the fissures actually change. They become less deep and the scales become more prominent. So when you're reading in your guidebook and it says becoming, that means as it gets old, right? My skin is soft and supple, becoming dry and wrinkly. Okay, so that's how you got to think about it with your trees. Okay, mushrooms too. It'll say becoming. All right, and we already talked about this, but it's worth repeating. Okay, our two main tree seasons. Okay, summer, fall, we're going to talk about oak trees, and then winter, spring is our tulip poplars. All right, so in your printout, the first whole page, numbers 1 through 5 are actually all oak trees. So those are all representations of different oaks, and really some of the most common oaks that you're going to see around in this area. One of them is not quite, but that I put it in there for a reason. So first things first, you got red versus white. Okay, those are the biggest ones you want to know. But there's also, willow and pin and turkey oaks, and I don't know, there's all kinds of different names. Okay, chestnut oaks, all kinds of things. But two main groups that you're going to see up here in the north where we live. Okay, red and white. We're going to talk about those differences in just a second. All of the acorns are edible, but I will tell you the acorns of your white oak are going to have less tannins. Okay, so that means you have to do less leaching in order to eat your acorn flour, and it is so good and it is so worth it. Get a group of friends, watch your oak trees. As soon as those acorns fall, gather them all up. Okay, and it's usually in a cycle of anywhere from 2 to 4 years when it really has a good acorn drop. And when it's got a good drop, I'm telling you, that stuff will last forever. Keep it in the freezer, keep it in the fridge. Mine has lasted for a couple of years without going bad or anything like that. Okay. All right, so the oak trees do have more fungi associated with them than any other tree. So like, for example, we're not really going to talk about walnut trees today. Okay. Could fungi be associated with it? Absolutely. But not as much. Okay. So when I'm saying closely associated, it just means a lot. All right. So we have red oaks and we have our white oaks. I know we just talked about this. Okay. Can I screen share the handout? I'm sorry, I don't think I know how to do that. I'm not sure why it would be scrunched. Maybe try the other format. So the first thing is when we're looking at our trees, the red oak is going to have really long furrows. Now, red oak, I'm actually not as interested in for the acorns, again, because they have higher tannins, but it is good to know that it is an oak tree, especially because there's a ton of wonderful, delicious fruiting mushrooms that come about on those oaks, again, especially in fall. I'm always looking for hen of the woods and chanterelles in the summertime too tend to grow around them. So our white oaks, okay, on the other side, right? And I think it's like double duty. You're looking for mushrooms, look for some acorns at the same time. That's part of the reason why I love this. White oak has shorter ridges, shorter scales. The furrowing is deeper in the white oak, a little bit less in the red oak. But most of the time, you guys are probably going to be looking at the leaf shape, okay? So on the red oak, okay, we have pointy ends on the red oak and on white oak, and these are two general categories. There's still lots and lots of different species under white oak and under red oak, but in general, the leaf shape of the white oak is curved. So what I like to talk about, and you can see on the printout, okay, the very first one, okay, number 1 is a northern red, and then the second one is our eastern black. Okay, so that's where those numberings go in. Okay. So, and number 3 is a pin oak. So there's a little bit deeper lobing in there. Okay. Now, the way that I remember the red oak, this actually comes from one of my other foraging friends. She's so cool. She teaches elementary school kids. And so she's like the best teacher for adults. Because I feel like we're like, as adults, we're always like, yes, I should remember things factually. And she's like, let's make it easy. Okay, so red oak has pointy tips. So if you touch your finger to something pointy, what happens? Okay, you prick it and it has blood, and blood is red. So that's why it's a red oak. Okay. Now, white oak, okay, I look at those edges and they're wavy. So I always think of wavy and white oak. Okay. So item number 4, okay, down below, that is actually white oak. Okay. And then number 5 is a chestnut oak. All right, so we're asking, I'll share real quick into the chat again since I see people asking about the handout. All right. So down in number 5 is a chestnut oak, if you guys are looking at that. Now, the reason I have chestnut oak on there, that is a type of white oak, but the reason that I have it on there is not because you're going to see it all the time. It's actually more of a southern oak tree. However, it produces some of the best acorns you will ever eat. They have very, very few tannins and they are huge. Okay, so on the left-hand side, those are chestnut acorns compared to here on the right-hand side, those are red acorns. So you can see there is a really, really big difference there. Okay, so you guys are going to type into the chat for me. What kind of an oak is this? Nice, white oak, because it is wavy. Very good. Okay, great. So this is one of, I don't do this for all of them, but I just wanted to make sure to give you at least some visual references for the types of mushrooms that you might be finding. Okay, so oak trees, like I said, are associated with a ton of mushrooms. So chanterelles and black trumpets are some of the prized mushrooms that you're going to find. Those are summer mushrooms. Same thing, chicken of the woods is a summertime mushroom. Okay, so it's already had one big fruiting. Okay. And if we get some more consistent rain in the same area and it has some nubs, it'll continue fruiting throughout the summer, just depending on the log and everything like that. Okay. Now, in addition, you'll also see on here the turkey tails. So not necessarily a good tasty mushroom. It does have some medicinal benefits, but I can't really attest to that a ton. And then down there, those are summer oyster mushrooms. So they're white. And you do have to catch those really quick. And that's actually on an oak tree. You can see the deep lobing and furrowing on that oak. Okay. In addition, we also have, of course, some fall mushrooms. So let's talk about this for a second. So when I'm looking for some of these fall mushrooms, like for example, the lion's mane or coral tooth or bear's tooth, or any of the ones that are really growing on the trees, not all of your, so some corals grow from the ground, but lion's mane in particular is a very sought after fall mushroom, and it tends to grow up high on dead trees or sometimes on fallen logs, but a lot of times you'll find it up high, which is kind of cool. And then down low at the base of those trees, that's where on the right-hand side with the shoe, you'll see hen of the woods or the maitake mushroom, and they do grow that big. That's actually not uncommon to find a maitake of that size. So the whiteness of the maitake on that right-hand side does indicate to us that it is getting a little bit older. Typically, I would want it to be a much more gray-brown color, really blending in with the color of the bark. I will only eat maitake in its baby stage. So with both of those mushrooms, with your lion's mane and your hen of the woods, what you really want to do is you want to find a fruiting buddy on a tree and then come back there year after year and catch it. Okay, lion's mane. You should wait until the strands, the tubes, are pretty long. Those you can let go for a while. It'll start turning yellow, and that's how you know it's kind of going bad. But yeah, you'll kind of get the hang of it watching the weather patterns and things like that. Other mushrooms that you can also find that are on here. So on the bottom left-hand side, those are honey mushrooms. And if you remember from the toxicity class, you must test every single batch of those. Of course, you can always have fall oyster mushrooms. You can have also winter oyster mushrooms. In addition, oak trees are associated with morels. Yep, you're going to hear a lot of things associated with morels. All right, so morels, all kinds of different boletes, whether that's your summer boletes or your fall. You have your Caesars amanita, which again you do need to pull up every single one of those and look for the bulbous base underneath, and your beefsteak polypores, just to name a couple of our tasty mushrooms. Okay, and that's not an overly extensive list, but it's a good start. All right, now in the springtime, of course, we always think of morels, and so we have our tulip poplars. Okay, so tulip poplars, that's actually one of my all-time favorite trees, especially from childhood. I'll show you why momentarily. So tulip poplars, if you look kind of on that sheet, if you're looking at number 6, okay, there we go. So 6, you'll actually see that the tree grows fairly upright. So if you look at the shape of your oak trees, they tend to grow pretty wide and round. Okay, but the tulip poplar is a very, very vertical tree. You can see over here on the left-hand side, we've got a young sapling. It's got a very distinctive leaf shape. There's no other tree that really grows like it. There are a few different types of poplars, but we're really focusing on the tulip poplar today. The bark you can see is not deeply fissured. To me, what it looks like wax running down. That's what it looks like to me. One little piece growing over top of the other. Now, what's really fun about it, okay, is all the little pieces of the puzzle. Okay, so tulip poplars have these gorgeous flowers to them that look like little tulips. And on the left, far left, you'll actually see my hand holding out a little petal. So in the early springtime, it takes a while for the ground to get warm enough for morels to start popping. Same thing for wine cap mushrooms, which do grow on hardwood. Like usually it's mulch or really like broken down hardwoods. But springtime is when you'd be finding them. And when you're looking on the ground, if you are looking in a tulip poplar spot and you don't see any little flower petals, you might be a little early. Now, if you see a lot of them and you see a lot of leaves broken off, you're probably too late. You've probably missed your morel season. So you want to catch them right at the beginning. Now on the bottom in the brown area, you can actually see where there's an old tulip poplar. It's actually a seed head from the flower. So that's a good way to tell you, because that bark can be really difficult to understand. And if that tree is really as tall as it should be for it to be a good mushrooming spot, you're not going to be able to see the leaves. The branches are up about 2 stories. So that, like I said, they are tall trees. So you got to look for the pieces that have broken off. Now over on the very, very far side, and I have this in 2 slides, okay, that leaf shape, okay, near and dear to my heart. I love cats. I grew up with a cat. So you should be able to see this in your screen. I would make leaf art and I would draw cats with my tulip poplars. So they have the little the ears, little eyes, and little whiskers coming off. And that's how I would always know, oh, it's tulip poplar, okay? So if you ever forget, that's a great way to say, wait a minute, what's this shape again? Can I draw a cat in there? And I always look for the whiskers and the ears, okay? Now, in terms of other like other mushrooms that are associated with it. There are others, but really it's morels. So this past spring, I was determined to find my spot of morels, not somebody else's. And my dad had told me, he's like, oh yeah, I think I saw some of those up on the hill with some of the pine trees. And I was like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah, but we've dug everything up there. Great, so that's disturbed all of my ceiling. Well, we used to have a tulip poplar growing up, but it had died. And I had been searching all over our woods. We have a 40-acre property in Tennessee, and then we also have a house. And the house doesn't have a lot of woods, but it has just a little bit. And then right beside the house was this spot where the tulip poplar used to be. There's actually a persimmon tree there now, and so I was hunting around, and I found dozens of morels popping up early. And it was around the dead tulip poplar roots. There was no longer any of them there. And then I came back about 6 weeks later, a little too late, and I did actually find another morel up where the pine trees had been. Okay, so just really cool. And around where that tulip poplar is, there's always mushrooms growing there all season long. Nothing edible aside from the morels, but it is really interesting. I had a lot of cup fungi come up, and just really fun to watch and to see them growing. All right, maples. Okay, so now we've gone out of our some of the two major ones. We'll get to pine trees in a little bit, but it is worth talking about maple trees. Now, maple trees never come up as like, this mushroom is really associated with maples, okay? But it'll always say like associated with hardwoods. So that's where it's really nice to know what is a maple tree, aside from tapping it and getting some delicious syrup, which I did this year. It was really fun. I mean, I didn't do it. It was at a county park, but it was really fun. So sugar maples, of course, are the ones that are like the best, okay, for actually getting a bunch of sap, but you can also tap birch trees and beech trees and all kinds of stuff. So it's not 100% exclusive. So number 7 in the photographs, okay, and I'll point it out, okay. Okay, so this is, so down at the bottom, we've got 3 different types of maple on the same page with your tulip poplars. So this first one, 7, is a sugar maple. Okay, and then there is a leaf for the Japanese maple, and then the red maple. So all of them are these, kind of beautiful pointy leaves, and they're the ones that have stunning color, okay, in the fall. These are also the ones that in early springtime have some of the coolest buds coming out. Okay, so they look like they could make like some fabulous tassels for a curtain or something like that. So and they were bright red. The ones down here are actually kind of orange. Another indicating factor for maple trees, many times, not all the time, okay, because other trees do have these little winged flyaway things. Elm trees and box elders and things like that do have them, but maple trees will have these kind of seeds. Now, on the maple trees, these seeds are also edible. So you can crack them open and toast them up, and it's actually a tasty snack. Okay. Now, I can't vouch for the rest of the trees that have our little winged friends, but maple trees are for sure edible. So in terms of the leaf shape, okay, again, I want to point out down here at the base, you can see how our leaf shape is actually widening just slightly. So again, on the left-hand side, we have a red maple, and on the right-hand side, that is our sugar maple. Okay. Again, we're just going to get a nice look at the seed pods here. If your neighbor has one of these, you probably hate it, or maybe if it's in your own yard, it can be a little bit frustrating, but again, that is one of our indicating factors. So this is one of our trees that grows up big and wide and large. Okay, you will see them everywhere. And again, it's just a good idea to know them. And the next one that's going to be on here is actually a sycamore. So sycamore, you can see this is not just like a wide tree. This is like the widest tree. Okay. Not only is it one of the broadest trees that's around, it's incredibly distinctive because of the bark features. So the more bark that we take a look at, the more you're going to be able to differentiate different bark styles when you do see them and you're out in the woods. So sycamore trees tend to be, people have them all the time in the city. So I live up in York, Pennsylvania, and they are everywhere around here. I was wandering around in Lancaster. They're everywhere in the city. Okay. They have huge broad leaves. Okay, and if you prune them correctly, they'll grow up and then out, which is actually kind of unique. So they don't really seem to get too stunted by getting hacked up, which some of our other trees definitely do. So the bark is really what's distinctive about these guys. They do have a fruit, which you can see on the drawing. Okay, but the leaves, or sorry, the bark here does peel off. So on the very, very far right-hand side, you can see it's coming off in patches. And if you don't know what that tree is, it looks like it's sick, but it's not. On the far left-hand side, we actually have a younger version of it, where the bark color is kind of has this reddish tone, and you can almost always tell it's a sycamore because you can see little bark peeling off. But even in the photo where you can see the bark peeling off, you can see at the base here, that looks like regular fissured, like an oak tree base or a maple tree base. Okay, so they do have some similarities there. Now, every now and then you will hear of mushrooms being found underneath sycamores or underneath maples, but usually those are kind of rare. Okay. All right. So we're going to keep moving through this just a little bit. That's how big a sycamore leaf can get. Okay. So in the South, okay, I remember always reading these very like elegant poems or short stories, and they're like, yes, let's take a leisurely afternoon and picnic under the sycamore. Why? Well, because it's probably got the most shade. I mean, you think about if you have a leaf that big, that is creating quite a different temperature change underneath that tree versus other ones where you might get dappled sunshine. So when you're sitting underneath, I mean, so I can tell you this, I actually know this tree. And you sit underneath that guy, there is no sunlight under there. And actually, right close to the base, there's not a lot growing because it just doesn't get any sun. So it's kind of cool. Now you'll see kind of dead spots under pine trees or other evergreen trees, but that's because of the acidity from the needles. That is due to a lack of sunlight. So that can be a pro or a con for mushroom growing, where a lot of mushrooms, they say that they actually do need like some sunlight. I don't understand it, but is what it is. All right, so this is the third tree that you absolutely want to know, and that's going to be your eastern white pine. Okay, so there's a lot of different pine trees and a lot of different evergreens, and I think for most of us, we're more in tune with the deciduous trees because as a child, you picked up leaves and you looked at them, you ripped them apart, or you jumped in them, or you did whatever. You did art. I mean, I would say 9 out of 10 of us probably, if you grew up in the United States, you probably had a class at some point where you made art with tree leaves. Okay, and if you didn't, do it now. Okay, walk out into the park and make some art with them because it's really fun. But because of that, you have a little bit more of an understanding of those different leaf shapes. But our evergreens, like my dad would always kill me. He's like, oh, we're going to get a Christmas tree this year. Which one should we get? Should we get, the such and such fir tree or the such and such spruce? I'm like, I don't know. Like, can we get something red? Like, the maple trees outside? And he's like, what are you talking? So anyway, there's a lot of different shapes out there. But with our pine trees, one of the distinctive features is kind of these long leaves. Now understand, when you say a pine needle, that is a leaf. It is a waxy coated leaf. And the reason that it is wax coated is so that it can actually retain moisture throughout dry winters and cold winters. So think about it. If you're outside in the cold and you have exposed skin, what happens is the water gets leached out by the cold and it gets chapped. Well, if you had a normal leaf, that's what would happen. The water would get leached out because think about it, a leaf is mostly water. So instead, they have very, very small surface area and they're waxy coated. And that's what makes it an evergreen. Okay. Now, the distinctive feature of the white pine, and this will be more clear when we see a couple of other of our evergreens. Okay, it has 5 needles per cluster. Okay, not 2, not 3, 5. Always 5. Okay, very easy. The eastern white pine is also a tasty edible. Okay, yup, that's a baked fish. Okay, we did a virtual cooking class earlier this year, and we did a whole fish in a salt bake. It was really fancy, and I definitely did white pine needles in there. Now, not all pine are edible, okay, but eastern white pine with the 5 needles per cluster is edible. And the way that you would actually use it as a seasoning, you clip off the top third, because remember it has that casing, so you do have to open that up, and then you can utilize that, and it has a bright citrusy taste to it. It doesn't taste like pine sol. It's really, really good. And really, it's best to get during the new growth season, which would be in early spring. Now, on the right-hand side here, you actually see a full growth pine tree. So the needles are kind of like interspersed. So you can actually see through the needles here. It's not super dense, okay? And you'll see a lot of them, brown on the ground. And they're over on that right-hand side. Again, you can see the full tree. So you can really see through the tree, not dense, nothing like that. And they are very, very fast growing trees. So we have them everywhere here in the eastern United States. Okay. So morels, they love pine trees, okay, in the springtime. So do porcini mushrooms. Okay, so these are 2 highly prized mushrooms. Now, our porcinis will make a reappearance in the fall. Okay, they are not a summer mushroom. So early spring, you might see a few, and then definitely they're really known more as a fall mushroom. So find your white pine areas, and I will tell you, pine trees do not last long. Okay, they are a very, very short-lived tree in the grand scheme of things, a couple decades, and then they're done. Okay, they do die. So anyway, yeah, that's the big thing with your pine trees is those porcini mushrooms. Okay, we have a couple more. Again, I'll show you a few more pictures. Your hedgehog mushrooms, which of course they don't have a pored surface on the hominium. That is actually little what do you call them? Teeth. Okay. And the matsutake, which don't look all that great, but the flavor is like, it's nutty. So you don't really get that a lot of times in our mushrooms, for the matsutake do. So they're very highly prized. Some others that are a little bit more rare, but I figure I should expose you guys to a couple of these things. Painted Cilius, I think that's how you say it. The blue milky or the indigo milky. Now, of course, if you're talking about the one on the left-hand side is a type of bolete. So anytime you're doing bolete or any guild ID, you absolutely must have 2 to 3 guidebooks and a person tell you that your ID is correct before you eat that mushroom. And again, I got to repeat this. You got your king bolete, okay? They're just beautiful. They dry wonderfully. They rehydrate wonderfully. They're one of the few mushrooms that you can actually find year round decently. If you have like a little Italian place, right? They're going to be stocking up on that one all year round. So some other mushrooms, I'm going to give you a little bit of a verbal list. Some other mushrooms that do associate with pine trees, okay, are chicken fat mushrooms, okay. Chanterelles do associate with pines. Okay, so remember, chanterelles are a summer mushroom. You have your Caesar's amanita. Okay, and those are a little bit more like fall time as your Caesars. Okay, and then in your late summer to early fall, you also have cauliflower mushrooms. And those look very, very similar to the hen of the woods that we talked about that grow at the bases of our oak trees. Okay, but cauliflower mushrooms, they happen earlier than hen of the woods, and they are completely white, and they're very, very roughly. Okay, so when we see a white hen of the woods, we know that it's a little bit old. But if it's really, really roughly and it's a little early in the season, maybe it's a cauliflower. Okay, and I would eat those anytime. They are really, really good. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on now to some more trees that are just good to know. So I'm going to give you a good brief overview of some of them. because you do need to know some dangerous things. And if you don't know some more, it's hard to compare and contrast. Hemlocks are regarded as some of our beautiful, wonderful native trees. They are super scraggly. I think they are so ugly looking. They look like shaggy old men all the time, right? You look at the needles there and they're not perfect. They're just kind of, they're almost opposite, but like not quite. What it reminds me of is like, so my dad's an old man, so I can say this, right? So when my dad doesn't go and get his hair cut, his eyebrows grow all crazy. They don't grow normal. They're just like, hey, you know? And that's kind of what I think of with the hemlock leaves. They're kind of crazy. Now, same thing, hemlock is actually edible. You can make a wonderful medicinal tree from that. It's not really as good of a spice as your eastern pine, but it's not too bad. Now, our hemlock is very, very closely associated with one of the best medicinal mushrooms you could ever have, and that is your reishi mushroom. There's actually one specific species of reishi that only grows on hemlock, but hemlocks are known to associate with a huge number of edible mushrooms, edible and non-edible, but definitely something to keep your eye out for. So winter and summer chanterelles, boletes, and hedgehogs are all very wonderful mushrooms associated with that hemlock. Okay, so again, scraggly looking tree, okay, but highly regarded. The sad part about hemlocks is that they are dying out. There's some stuff attacking them. Kind of sucks. Okay. All right, spruce trees. So on the left-hand side, we have one kind of spruce, and then on the right-hand side, we have another. Oh, and on your page, number 12 is actually a hemlock. Okay, just so you can have that reference. All right, now the spruce tree on the left-hand side is a Norway spruce that is not native, but that's the one that is kind of taking over. On the right-hand side is a blue spruce. There are many, many, many more types of spruce, but these are the two main kinds that you will find in our area. Okay, now that being said, okay, Norway spruce, and actually all of these, the spruce trees are the Christmas tree trees. They're gorgeous. And I remember Norway, like I remember both of these because I'm like, oh, they're big, woolly, and bushy all around. Okay. The Norway spruce hangs down. Okay. So you can really, you know, they're great for like draping stuff on them. And, but both of them, you have your branch, and then the needles go all the way around. So when you hang your ornaments on there, they won't fall off, because they really are stuck in there. So that's why I think of them as the Christmas tree. So a lot of times, like if I'm drawing my notes, I draw like a little Christmas tree around the spruces because I'm like, right? And they're pretty full. I mean, look at both of those. Those could really show off some beautiful decorations. Okay. So spruce trees, we also think of spruce tips. Now the Norway spruce in our area is a little bit more tannic, a little bit more bitter. And spruce tips, these are what you would see in the springtime. These are bright green that is not enhanced. Okay, the blue spruce is actually very similar. Like on the right hand side, these poor spruce are growing, you can't see it on the other side. That's a whole fence line, so they're being chopped off. That's why they don't look as healthy. But you can see those tips are like, they're like fluorescent, so you can really see them. And yeah, I highly recommend eating them. They're delicious. So you can make ice creams and syrups and all kinds of stuff. But the old school method is to interlay those spruce tips with sugar. And I do recommend an organic sugar, not because I go organic. It has to do with the crystal structure and the flavor quality. And then you actually leave it in there, popping it open for anywhere from 6 months to 8 months. And you just let it ferment. And what happens is the sugar actually pulls out the liquid that's inside, and eventually it will become a syrup. So it's pretty cool. You don't, but you need a lot of sugar. Okay, otherwise it'll ferment, and then you'll get spruce alcohol, which is fine. And then if you don't like alcohol, that's fine. Add in a little, natural bacteria and turn it into vinegar. Okay, so anyway, it'll be wonderful. All right, now on 13, if you're looking at your page with a nice Christmas tree shape, that is your spruce tree. Okay. Let me get my page, make sure I have like 4 different sets of pages here. So bear with me. Trees that associate with it. Okay. So again, okay, I'm going to be repeating some of these things a lot. So we have boletes in general. okay, will associate with these. Again, your porcini really associate with your pine and your spruce, especially early spring, late fall. Morels will associate with it. So I will remember that forever, because my dad, with the, with the evergreen side of the house, and that's where I found the morels, was on the evergreen side, but then I also found them on the tulip poplar side. So it was really easy for me to remember. Bluets are another one. So bluets are a purplish mushroom that you would actually find on leaf litter, but they grow near spruce trees. It's real weird. In my neighborhood, my urban neighborhood, there's a spruce tree, and right beside it, growing kind of on leaf litter and in the ground in the fall, I'll find bluets. It's real weird. Okay. And then of course in the summertime, you can also find some chanterelles. Okay. All right. Next, one that'll kill ya. Cool. Don't eat this. Okay. Some people will confuse Canadian yew with hemlock. Don't do that. You'll die. This is not a joke. It will stop your heart. All parts of the yew, specifically I'm talking about Canadian yew, there are a dozen different types of yew, just like with every plant, but they all grow differently. Okay, none of them are actually native, but they are planted as ornamental plants all the time. And you can see there on the right-hand side, okay, that leaf shape, leaf arrangement looks pretty similar to hemlock. Okay. However, on the left-hand side, you see one that the leaf arrangement helps you to see that the actual shape of the needle is slightly flat, and it does have a pointed end. So that's kind of your key there. So yew will kill you. Okay. So again, using the pointed finger thing, if you could prick your finger on those, okay, that's going to kill you, right? Because if you have blood, prick, you'll get poison inside of there. You're done. Now, that being said, the berry is actually edible, but the seed is not. So you can live swallowing the seed whole, but if you crush the seed at all, it will stop your heart. Some people have survived eating seeds and things like that. I don't recommend it. I have eaten the berry, and it's not worth it. It's that simple. Okay. Over here on the left-hand side, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a look at the shape. An English yew, you're not going to eat that. Okay, because we haven't talked about anything that shape. But you see that Canadian yew, if it's like shaped, look how bushy and full that is compared to our scraggly looking hemlock, you're going to be fine, because now you know, right? Hemlocks don't grow like that. They're old man eyebrows. And again, the Chinese yew, we haven't talked about a tree that grows that straight up with neat looking branches like that. So you will be just fine. So don't eat mushrooms growing on yew either or around it. Okay, so one of the things to keep in mind, anytime somebody says something about a tree that can have certain components that may be detrimental to you, if a mushroom is growing on that substrate, it can take those properties inside of that mushroom. So you do need to be cautious about that. It is not recommended to eat anything surrounding a yew at all. No plants, no mushrooms, nothing. Same, actually, there's certain consideration for cherries as well. So cherry bark is actually used medicinally because it does have very small components of cyanide, but it's really low. So what that does is that actually helps to suppress coughs and things like that, because it's actually like stopping your muscles from working. Of course, if you have too much of that, that could be an issue. So I have heard some people recommend not eating mushrooms from cherry bark and things like that, but I don't know the validity of those statements. For me, I always follow the same protocol anyway, which is like the small amount and going upward. So you just kind of see what works for you. All right, next thing, beech trees. These are my absolute loves and my favorite. They have an almost entirely smooth bark. They are an extremely slow growing tree. They don't even produce beech nuts until they're about 80 years old. Okay, and that's like their teenage years. So they take a long time to actually develop. But a lot of times you'll see it written there. It goes oak trees, beech. Okay, so our forests, especially in this area, are really being populated by a lot of beech trees. So the American chestnut is kind of being, a lot, really just destroyed. Again, things come over, things kill the American plants. It sucks, but it is what it is. And beech trees are taking over for that. Okay. So if you see a bunch of beech trees around and maybe a couple of maples, you can think in your mind, oh, all the same stuff that you might be seeing with oak trees. So one of the ways that you know it is a beech tree, because these trees grow very, very, very tall. Okay. And yes, you might see the bark, but you might be second guessing. You might say, wait, is that a birch? Like, what is this? I can't see the leaf. If you look at the base, it has what's called a buttressed base. So Notre Dame is known for having these buttresses. So buttresses are these parts that are flying out from the side to help support the taller building structure. So these were, that word buttress was actually first coined in like the Gothic era of building. Okay, so another picture of a buttressed tree. And again, just to give you that idea of, again, this Gothic style of these big pieces that are they're just helping support the really tall tree, because they grow very, very, very tall. Now the leaves are pretty fascinating. So they have a very, very fine serration. So number 15 is a beech leaf, and it has an even serration, kind of like a bread knife. Now, when these are younger, you can actually eat them when they first unfurl, and they actually have a lemony quality. So if you take them and you stack a whole bunch of them up, and then you can stick them in a jar, and you can actually just put some vinegar on there, leave it for a year or 2 years, and they become really, really soft and pliable and delicious. Okay, so eat your leaves. Okay. On the right-hand side, we see a beech leaf in fall. So they turn this kind of golden rust color, and they actually do not fall off the trees. So that's why you've probably never collected them. Okay. So beech leaves, and that's one of the ways that you know it's a beech tree in the wintertime. It's awesome because you're like, there's no leaves anywhere, but what are those golden things? That's probably a beech tree. So those leaves don't fall off until the new leaves start sprouting in the springtime. So that's a really great way of knowing, oh, beech. Okay. So beeches are really known for associating, again, with our lion's mane and our bear's head tooth, right? So those are our toothed mushrooms that we talked about, also associated growing up high with our oak trees on the dead ones. Okay. So these grow in dead trees. Those are both fall mushrooms. Then we also have oyster mushrooms, and that's, summer, winter, fall, anytime are oyster mushrooms, which the oyster mushrooms tend to grow on fallen logs and very like highly decayed logs. Okay. Hedgehog mushrooms grow around them on the base in the fall. Wood ear mushrooms will grow on beech trees as well as elm trees. We'll get there in a second. And chaga, which is another one of our medicinal mushrooms. So closely related to beech trees in terms of both mushrooms and in terms of look is actually the birch tree. So you can see here, this is actually a progression of birch bark from young to old. So you can see the horizontal striping, and a lot of times we think of birch trees as being peeling. Okay, so these don't really peel, but they have horizontal layers here and then vertical fissures. Okay, now very early on, we saw cherry bark, which has horizontal bark and horizontal fissures. Okay, so birch goes the opposite. Okay, so that's kind of your distinguishing feature. And then you can see all the way over here on the right-hand side, the fissures have gotten so deep, but it's actually turned to scales. Again, with our birch trees, I'll show you again. We think of, so this is a yellow birch, we think of peeling. Black birch is the one you're going to see. We don't have white birch. It sucks. It's really pretty. Okay. Black birch is 16. Sorry, 17 we will get to in a moment. Okay, so black birch is 16. Okay. And then another photo. So if we look at the leaf shape here, we can see what we call, this is not an even serration. So if we're looking at that leaf edge, there's things called double serration or uneven serration, things like that. And that's what we would see here on the birch trees. So birch and beech can be really confusing. That's why I have both of those leaf shapes on there. But if just a little bit of looking, you'll see. And birch trees don't have the buttressing. Birch trees do not get as tall or as old as our beech trees. And again, There is the birch polypore, which closely associates with your birch tree. And of course, the chaga mushroom, really, really big one for birch trees. Number 17 on your list is going to be an elm tree. Okay, we're going to go a little bit quicker through the last couple of these. Okay, and again, you can see that serration, but this time the serration is much deeper. That's how you know it's an elm. Okay, so very, very easy to see that. Again, you're going to hear with elm trees, some early springtime mushrooms would be your morel mushrooms are associated here, your dryad saddle or your pheasant back. Okay, elm oysters, and again, your chaga mushrooms. So all of these kind of go together. And again, just a very, very cool looking kind of bark. So we've been looking at some bark that has more scaly textures with the fissures. This is much more ridges, okay, with your elm trees. Box elder, okay, really known for woodier mushrooms. Woodiers and chaga, again, our dryad saddle, which is our early spring, and morel mushrooms. Basically, morel mushrooms associate with almost every single tree we're talking about on this list. So there's a lot of trees that morels associate with, okay? But, okay, on the left-hand side is box elder, and on the right-hand side, that's poison ivy, okay? So a lot of times, poor little box elder's growing along and everybody's like, oh, it's poison ivy, okay? And then they'll rip it up. So number 18 on your sheet is box elder. And the way that you can always tell if it's box elder, even if it's a little baby sapling, is that the leaves grow opposite each other. Poison ivy, the leaf, like your actual leaflets, because remember, okay, this whole thing is a leaf, okay? So the opposite pair here, that's a leaflet. Those are 3 leaflets on a leaf, okay? So leaves on poison ivy grow alternate, and on box elder, they're perfectly opposite. So that's how you know the difference if you can't see it due to poison ivy's wonderful ability to adapt, okay? So number 19 on your page is poison ivy. Okay, so again, you can just kind of see the bark looks just, I mean, it's just kind of nondescript. But you can really see here on the right-hand side, that box elder. And that has more than the 3 leaves, but that's when it's older. And sometimes you can't see that, okay? So with the box elder, yep, we talked about that one with the wood ear. So that's a big one. Okay, so another dangerous one, okay, is your black locust, and that's number 20. So black locust is the first tree that we've talked about here that actually has alternating leaflets. So we have talked about, so we can kind of, I mean, you can really see that quite clearly in the photo. So every part of the black locust is toxic except for the flowers, which have the most amazing purple grape flavor you've ever had. Purple grape, but like if it were all natural. And you can just eat it like grapes. So I actually have, so the thing that I did with the spruce tips with the layering, I did that, but I accidentally had, I didn't have enough sugar in there. And so it fermented. So now I have black locust like cordial and it's amazing. So yeah, if you like elderflower liqueur or something like that, this is better. So sweet, but not as cloyingly sweet. The biggest indicator here that it is a black locust is those the long sets of leaflets that are alternating, and then you look for the little spikes. So again, this is one to be careful of. So for example, if chicken of the woods is harvested from black locust, if you drink wine while you're eating it, you will vomit a lot. You can, a lot of people can drink wine with chicken of the woods, but not from black locust. Okay, so black locust is a scrub tree. It tends to grow on the outskirts. And it's a nitrogen fixing plant. It's wonderful for the environment. So it is growing usually on the outskirts of your forest, not typically too far in. A couple more that we're going to kind of skim through here. So on the last page, 21 is an American mountain ash. I have that on there just so you can see. It's another one that's really, really, it's kind of fun. And I like to point it out because ash berries are actually a peppercorn substitute that's native to the United States. Number 22 is the common ash tree, and number 23 is white ash. Now, all of those ash trees have leaf shapes that are very similar to hickory. Okay, and actually I'm going to switch to this page. So hickory has kind of these long, wide leaves that look very, very similar to pawpaw. Okay. I like to point it out just so you can start getting an idea of some of the differences of different leaf shapes that you might find. Hickory is not one that we tend to say, yep, we're going to find a lot of mushrooms around it, but it is a good one to know because it's not that hard to ID. And then you can rule it out as like, oh, okay, like, yep, I kind of know what that tree is. I'm seeing what's in this forest. Hickories are a hardwood. You know, I can look around. But if there's no oaks or beech or anything like that, may not be a great spot. In the early springtime, it has a really unique kind of budding, and it looks like it. So the buds come out, and then they have this really cool peel back, and then you can see each one of these leaves coming out with the tiniest little leaflets that come out. They are so cute. I just love them. They're one of my favorite springtime finds. Okay. You'll know that it's hickory as well, because a lot of times you'll see on the left-hand side, this is a normal, like a regular, like a pig nut or something like that hickory. And on the right-hand side, that is your shagbark hickory. Okay, so your bark will tell you if it's a shagbark. Shagbark hickory makes the best nuts. Okay, and a lot of times you will see the nuts on the ground. Okay, so hickory nuts. So hickory is also a walnut, just so everybody knows. Okay, black walnut is not the same. It is actually different. Okay, it's same kind of family, but it's shaped differently. That's what I'm meaning. Okay, so it has a different kind of shell type, but for the most of the hickories are going to have something that has this outer green shell that can break into different pieces and peel off. The really tasty ones will come off easily, like your shagbark, which is what we have up top. And then we have the bitter nuts, which are smaller down here below. Bitter nut is not so great. Okay. All right, so we've just gone through these. 24, if you're going along, is a shagbark hickory, and 25 is the bitter nut. So bitter nut has a little bit of a wider leaf base. Okay. All right, perfect timing. All right, so I have an activity for you guys. Okay. Give me just a second. And brainful, I know. Did you see how I'm just like skimming through those last ones? So, do any mushrooms grow in and around pawpaw though? Nothing's associated with it, no. Sorry. Only 50%? That's way more than I told you should get. How much should you get? 10%. All right, so what are the 3 main trees, okay, that you really want to know? Type it in. Pine oak and poplar. Andy was quick. Yes. Very, very good. Very, very good. Okay. So how many needles does an eastern white pine have in a bundle? 5. Nice. Very, very good. Very good. All right. Now, how do you know it's a red oak? What's a way to tell that it's a red oak? Blood. See, you guys got this. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you guys, okay, this is, let's see, it's 8:20 right now. I'm going to give you guys 6 minutes, and I want you to take this survey right now. It is a pop quiz, and there are things that are on this that, no, we did not talk about, but y'all are going to log on, and in 6 minutes, I'm going to come back, and we'll chat through answers or any questions that you guys might have. Don't worry, if you get questions wrong, that's good, because then you'll remember it later, okay? So adults are so afraid to get things wrong sometimes, but don't be, okay? Do your best. And I'm going to put myself on mute. All right, guys, let's go through it. Okay. So type in the chat box. Was it hard? It was hard, wasn't it? Like the first couple were definitely hard. Yes. The reason it's hard is because there is simply too much information to convey just through a presentation. That's actually why I gave the link for you guys to actually attend a live walk. Okay. Just hearing something from me and reading something from a book doesn't actually teach you all of the skills that you need to have in order to truly understand how to mushroom hunt. So those first two questions are designed to help show you that it's a lot more than just, oh yeah, I can just walk around. No. So there's definitely an etiquette to understanding how to mushroom hunt that a lot of people just don't know. So the first question says, you're in a state park and you see a bunch of oak and beech trees. So we know right away, oh, cool, oak and beech, that's got a lot of great mushrooms. It's July. We've had a lot of rainstorms. That means it's a really good time for chanterelles. Okay. So the first two say go off trail. That's a huge no-no in a state park. Never. So there's a really big problem, especially with foraging starting to really increase, is that, it's not an issue if one person goes off trail, but when you're in a public park, you can't do that because now you have thousands of people going off trail. And that's when you start trampling all of our really wonderful loamy soil, and you do start hurting the environment. I mean, we've actually seen it this past year. Trails that we love to go on are just crushed. Okay. So for both of them, stay on the trail and you look for signs. And again, stay on the trail, look for water movement. So that's the first thing if you are in, especially if you're in a public area. Now, the second one, and again, these were meant to be tricky, okay? You're in a friend's place, okay? So that means you don't have to worry as much about staying on a trail because it's got less foot traffic there. Sorry, so somebody asked, so water movement is good for chanterelles. It's good for mushrooming in general. So that kind of stuff is covered in some of our earlier classes, but yes, water is incredibly important. So location, we've got maple and oak trees. So again, we're thinking hardwoods, spruce and pine. Oh, I'm thinking maybe there's like some porcini, something like that. It's a quick walk though. Okay, porcini are kind of difficult. I'm probably going to be looking for larger mushrooms. So the first thing I want to think of when I think of September, and now we're going to October, so we're talking about like solid fall. I want to think of my my lion's mane, and I want to be thinking hen of the woods. So I would have said I'm going to look at the base of my old dead oaks. Yes, for my hen of the woods. I'm going to look at the base of the spruce trees for hen of the woods. No, so I'm not looking at my evergreens for those hen of the woods. I am going to look up high on those oak trees for my lion's mane, maybe some oysters, not as common. Dead logs, on the fallen logs for chicken. Nope, not for chicken because chicken is a summer mushroom. Okay. And again, on the fallen dead logs for my oysters and lion's mane and bear's tooth. Okay. All right, porcinis. Okay. They're associated with spruce and pine in the late summer into fall. Okay, so they are not a winter mushroom. Okay, so we're coming up on porcini season soon. When scouting for tulip poplars, the easiest thing to do, look for the flower petals. Okay, so that's the biggest thing. So remember we were talking about how in the springtime, okay, you're probably going to see just a few of the little flower petals, and that's how you know, ooh, okay, so it's warm enough for the soil to be pushing those flowers out. It's probably warm enough for the morels to start popping. So that's a really good indicator there. Hemlock trees. Hemlock are the old man trees, okay, and they're good. They're not poisonous, okay, but yew is deadly poisonous. It'll kill you, okay, all parts of it, except for the one little fleshy bit of berry, which is not worth it. Okay. No, don't kill the yew. Oh, kill you. Oh God. Oh my gosh. Okay. I know a plant is a box elder and not poison ivy. That was a very bad pun. Box elder has opposite leaves. So box elder, he's a tree. He's very proper, right? So perfect opposite leaves. And poison ivy, okay, is a little, alternate. Okay, so a little spindly. You should be extra careful at eating mushrooms growing on black locust. Okay, because remember, black locust is entirely toxic except for the flowers. The yew tree, which we just talked talked about again, sometimes cherry again, you know, okay? All right, so hopefully that went over a couple of other things. I really do, I highly recommend if you can make it to our very last nature and mushroom walk, definitely attend that. Jared Urchek is absolutely amazing. I cannot say enough good things about him. He actually runs walks for Foxhaven along with running his own acupuncture business. So he really understands medicine of nature from an Eastern perspective as well as a Western perspective. So yeah, that's the fun of it. Now, the next time our virtual cooking class on storage and cooking will actually be led by a forager chef, a really good friend of mine. His name is Julian Fortu, and his knowledge base is absolutely unreal. Okay, he's going to be doing this class for you guys. You can ask him anything and everything, and he will know an answer. And I don't know how he knows that much stuff. So in any case, thank you guys for coming out tonight. Sorry, I see one last question. If you see chicken on a decaying log, how can you be sure it is not a black locust? If you can't find the little thorny things, you can't. Okay, so anyway, that's where our toxicity class talked about ingestion, things like that. But again, there's a lot to learn. Okay, questions are good. Keep coming to classes, go on walks. Thank you guys for coming tonight.